But yeah, thank you guys for coming today. We're gonna introduce JavaScript in this meeting. Um, yeah. Yeah, so JavaScript is the programming language of the three fundamentals uh, to build a web application. So we have HTML, we have like CSS, and JavaScript is the third piece. So JavaScript is a interpreted language, unlike compiled languages like Java. So you can just directly execute JavaScript on your browser without having to compile that to a lower level code. So JavaScript is also like statically typed. So when you like declare a variable, you don't specify the type of the variable, whether that be like string or integer. So the type of a variable is determined at like runtime when you actually like execute your code. And JavaScript also conforms to the ECMAScript specification. So it's basically this specification that tells people like how people should like write JavaScript. It's like a standard. And I think the latest standard is like ECMA, like ES6, which came out in like 2015. And that kind of like introduced many great features, such as like arrow functions and also other things, which I'll introduce in a little bit. But so the way you run JavaScript is, so there are like two ways. So the first one is basically running it through your browser, which is like client. And you can also run that on a server by using Node.js, which is a JavaScript runtime. But during today's meeting, we're just gonna use our browser to run JavaScript. Um, so why learn JavaScript? So JavaScript is the programming language of the browser, and it can be used for both front end with frameworks like React or Angular, and also backend with Node.js. So with just like learning one language, you can build like a full stack application. And JavaScript is also used in building mobile applications, like using React Native and Ionic. Um, and it can also be used to build like desktop applications, like using Electron library. So as you can see, like JavaScript is like really convenient and is like really useful to learn. So with just one language, you can actually build like many parts of an application. Let me put this over. Okay. So here are some directions for you. Uh, if you could like create a folder on your computer called WebDVT _ workspace. So if you haven't been to our like previous meeting, then you can do this. But if you already done that, then you can just create a folder called JavaScript cheat sheet inside that folder. And after that, you can open up WebStorm or any text editors of your choosing. And inside WebStorm, you can like open this folder just by clicking on this icon. And then after that, you can right click on your left sidebar and just create an HTML file called index.html, and I'll say main.js, which is your JavaScript file. And let me know if you have any trouble doing this. Yeah, and I'll give you guys a minute to do this. Yeah, so you can basically right click on the folder and then click on this HTML file, and I'm gonna call this index.html. And then you can also create a JavaScript file called main.js. So after you've done that, your IDE, if you're using WebStorm, it should like automatically populate this for you. So after that, like right before this body, you can create a script tag, and then you can specify its source attribute, and you can type in main.js. So once you've done that, you can actually just do a simple JavaScript code. So that would be console.log. So let's just say hello world. So this is the same as print statement in Python or system.out.println in Java. So after you wrote this this console log statement, you can um, you can open up your browser. So I'm using Chrome. Let's see. So you can do file, file, colon, and triple slash, and you can specify the location of your file. So the way to do that is that you can like right click on your index.html, and then you can go to copy file path. So yeah, so if you do copy absolute path, and then you can like paste that right after this, you should be able to open up your HTML file. And then the way you can see the see your console log is by like opening up your developers tool by right clicking on this page and selecting the inspect option. And then if you go to console and see, oh yeah, we should probably include this inside the main.js. But let's see. Okay, yeah. So here we see our console log. So if you go to the console tab, you can see the output of your console statement, the log statement. Yeah. So there, as I mentioned, there are like two ways to run JavaScript. So the first one is through a client's browser, and the second one is through Node.js by like running that on the server. But since we haven't introduced Node.js, we're just gonna do it through our browser. So you can literally just create a script tag inside the body of your HTML document, and then you can type in the name of the file, the path to the source attribute, and then you can open up your HTML document on your browser, and then you can like open up your developers tool, and then refresh your web page, and you should see the output of your JavaScript code. So let's talk about variable types in JavaScript. So there are three ways to declare variables in JavaScript. So the first one is using var, and we have let and const. So var is like the old standard way of declaring variables, but the newest way to declare them is using either let or const. So the main difference with const is that like once you initialize your variable, you can't like reinitialize it by assigning it a new value. But with let, you can reinitialize as many times as you want. So that's the main distinction, and I'll go over this in a little bit. But and I'll also explain like why JavaScript like people decided to get rid of var and instead like decided to use let and const. And there are like six data types. So the first one is string, which over here you can see we have a name of John. And we also have a number, so that could be a integer or a floating point, like in Java. So it could be like any number, numerical value. And we also have a Boolean, which is basically like true or false. And we also have null, undefined. So the main distinction between null and undefined is that, like, if you declare a variable without any value, then it will have a type of undefined, which basically means that this value, like this variable, has an empty value. And null means the same thing, except that like the developers is like manually giving it a empty value. So over here we have a variable x of null, and we also have a variable y of undefined. So usually if you want to give a variable an empty value for whatever reason, then you should try to use null. And undefined is more like how JavaScript decided to give this variable a value. Like if you just declare it without initializing it. And any other data types have a data type of object, so that includes arrays. Yeah. So let's actually go to our text editor. Yeah. So we can create a so let's create a variable called name, and let's give it a value of John. And you don't have to put a semicolon in JavaScript like in Java. So that is not required, but I just prefer to have it. And we can also create a value of type number. So let's give John an age of 27. So this is going to be a string, and this is going to be a number. And we can also have a Boolean variable. And let's give it a value of false. And you can also have a value like variable of type number. So let's give it a height of 5.6. So if we try to console log their type, so let's do a name. So the way you can check the type of your variable is using this keyword called type of. And let's do the same for age. And also heights. Okay, so if we were to go back to our browser and refresh this page, and as you can see, we now see the type of those variable that we created. So we have, so the name has a type, so the variable name has a type of string, and for the variable age, it has a type of number, and is married has a type of Boolean, and height has a number, like type of number. Yeah. So let me comment this out. Cool. So as I mentioned, there are like 3 ways to declare variables in Java, like in JavaScript. So the first one is using a const. So if we were to create a variable with const, let's say student, and let's give it the name of John. And if we were to reinitialize this, reinitialize it with a value of Jane, this is gonna give us an error. So it's gonna return a type error because we're trying to assign a new value to a const variable. So if we try to run this on our browser, yeah, it's gonna give you an error. So basically, if you want to declare a variable that you know you're gonna like reinitialize, give it a new value, then you should use let instead of const. So I'm just gonna comment this out. So let's create another student. So let's say this is student 1. And another student has a name of Sam, but if we were to change this to Jack, then it's not gonna give us any errors. So let's refresh it. And as you can see, we don't get any errors. Yeah, so that's the main distinction between const and let. So you should use const when you know you will not reassign a variable, and otherwise you should use let. So let's go over string, like concatenating strings, like how to return strings. Okay. So in JavaScript, you can concatenate strings by using a plus sign. So, but the more readable way of concatenating string is using template literal. So it basically lets you inject variables and logic directly into a string. So instead of using a double column, like double colon or a single colon, you use a backtick. So it is the key right next to your like the one key on your keyboard. So with that, you can literally just like inject logic and variables inside your string by using a money sign and curly braces. So if you look at the example we have over here, both of them returns the same output, but as you can see, like the second one is much more readable and it is like less code. So yeah, so you should try to use template literal with like backtick when you try to output variables with like console log. Yeah. So let's try that. So I basically copied over this block of code. So the first one is using plus sign to concatenate different strings with like variables, and the second one is using string interpolation, which is the template literal that I just showed. But if we were to run this, as you can see, we get the same thing. So this is from line 25, and this one is from line 27. And let's go over some string operations and properties. So let's say we have a string called hello world. And we want to know the length of the string, right? So I'm going to use template literal. So I'm using a backtick. So let's say the length of this length of if string is, and then so you can get the length of the string by just getting its property. So this string has a property of length. So if we were to log this, so let's actually comment this one out. So as you can see, so this string has a length of 11. So it is 11 characters long. So you can also like get part of the string by using the substring function. So let's say the substring of the string is str.substring, and you can pass in the index of the characters that you want to like cut. So we want to get the string that is from the start to the 5th character. So that will be like so that will be just the hello, the first word. So if we were to save it and refresh our browser, and as you can see, it is outputting hello, just the first word of this string. And you can also split a string by some characters. So if we want to turn this into an array separated by this comma sign, then we can use this we can use this function called split. So we can do nums.split, and we can pass in the separator that we want. So this will be the comma. So this is going to split the string by its delimiter. So if we were to go back, yeah, so as you can see, it has turned this string into an array of strings from 1 to 5. Okay, so now let's go over arrays. So array is a type of object in JavaScript. So it is this variable that is used to store multiple elements. and it can also store elements of different types. So it doesn't have to be like one type. So you can like add a string or a number to a single array without getting an error. So elements are accessed by passing the index. So the index range from 0 to the, and so it starts from 0. So if you want to get the first element of this array, then you just do fruits and brackets and 0. And so that's how you get an array elements. Let's see. Yeah, so let's try to create an array. So let's say we have an array of integers. So the first way of creating array is using the array function. So, and if we try to log this, and as you can see, we have an array of integers from 1 to 4. So this is the first way of creating an array, but the more common way is using brackets. So if we want to create an array of fruits, and we can log this fruits by, let's console log this fruits. Okay. Yeah, so we have a list of fruits. And you can get the length of this array by using the length property. So if we were to save it and let's see, and go to our browser, and the fruits array has a length of 4, which means it has 4 elements. And so we're not restricted to having just one data type as elements. We can also pass in a string, a number, and a Boolean, like just into like one array. So it accepts like different data types. So if we were to console log this, we can see its elements. So the first one is a string, the second one is a number, and the third one is a Boolean. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions, and I'll answer them. So the way you can access an array is by passing in its index. So over here, we're trying to access the second element of this inside this array of fruits. So that will be oranges. So if we were to console log this, we get the name of this, the value of this element, which is oranges. So let's talk about how to add element to an array. So if you know the length of your array, then you can just pass in the last, like the index of the last slot that is like empty. So in this case, since our array has a length of 4 and the fourth slot is like empty, then we can just create a value for this slot. So in this case, we're passing in grapes as the last element. And if we try to console log this array again, then we get so we get an array of 5 elements with grapes added at the end. Let's see. So the way you can add an element if you don't know your array size is using the push function. So you can do fruits dot push, and you can pass in your element. So let's pass in peers. And if we were to console log this array again, let's see. Yeah, now we have an array of 6 elements, and as you can see, we have pairs at the end of this array. So that's how you add an element if you don't know the size of your array. So if you want to add an element at the beginning of your array, then you can use onShift. So this adds an element to the start of an array. So if we were to log this again, let's see. So now we have strawberries at the starts. Let's see. And you can also remove the last element of an array by using the pop function. So if we were to use pop and then see the elements of our array again. So as you can see, like before we had right. So this removes the last element. So let's refresh it again. Yeah, I don't know why it's like displaying like only 6 elements over here, even though it has like 7 elements. So that's weird. Okay. But if you want to remove an element at a specific index, then you can just use this function called splice. So let's say we want to remove the second element. Yeah, this should be the number of elements that you want to delete starting from this index. So let's do fruits again. Yeah, I don't know why it is like outputting the same elements even though we have like removed an element. Fruits in brackets. No, let's see. So let me just remove all other console logs. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like my browser is evaluating this statement like after it has like executed this statement. So yeah, that shouldn't be the case. But yeah, I think I'll look into this. But like if you take a look, like if we were to comment this out, comment out this line that removes a element, and then console log again, then you see that we have like 6 elements, right? But if we were to like remove the comment um, and like look at this again, we see that this apples is like removed from the list. So before we had like strawberry, apples, oranges, bananas, but now we don't have apples over here. So I think it is working, but I think it is just like not executing these statements in the order that I wrote them. Okay, so this bracket, no, so the reason I used this bracket is because I wanted to display the content without having to like writing the, like by also like outputting the name of this variable, which is fruits. So I could have done something like fruits and then putting the variable itself. But this is like really tedious, right? So let's try this. So as you can see, we're like logging this string, and then we're logging the array itself. But over here, we're actually logging a JavaScript object, which has a field of fruits, which is an array. So I'm just like converting this to an object and then logging it. So it's like much more. So it's like less code, and I also know like what value this I know like what this value corresponds to. So this is literally the same as fruits like this. And I'll talk about like JavaScript object maybe during next meeting, but yeah. So this is like a simple trick. So it is like really useful when you try to like console log stuff and debug your code. So you shouldn't like this is the much like better way of logging things instead of like first logging the name of your variable. So you have to like manually type this in, and this is like much more easy. But yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the slide. Yeah, I think I'll go over this during next meeting, just because it is kind of tricky to understand this syntax. But yeah. So another really useful thing to know, like in JavaScript, is the object literals. So object literal is basically a set of key value pairs that make up properties of an object. So if you ever like used Python before, it is similar to dictionary in Python. So it uses key value pairs, so you can specify the name of your variable, which is like the key, and you can also specify the value of that like property. So it is called a property of an object. So if you've heard of JSON, so JSON is basically a format of like data. So JSON stands for like JavaScript object notation. So it is derived from JavaScript object literals. So over here we have a person object. So we give this person the properties of first name, last name, age, and hobbies. So hobbies is an array. And we also gave it an address. So address is another object inside this person object. So we can actually like concatenate like nest objects inside objects. So it is like really like convenient to structure your data. So let's try to create an object. So I'm just gonna copy paste this this block of code. So if we want to basically like log this object, then what we can do is we can just convert this into another person object. So instead of writing this, you can just pass in the name of this object itself, and it'll like automatically like give it its own value. So if we try to see the content of this object, now let's go back to our browser, and if I were to refresh, and so as you can see, we have this object and you can see all of its properties. So we have a list of an array of hobbies, and we also have its address, which is a type object, like JavaScript object literal. So if you want to access a single variable, like single value, like property, then you can just use the dot notation. So you can do person dot first name. And if we were to check this, then here we're actually logging the first name of this object that we created, which has a first name of John. And we can also output its hobbies. So this is getting the third element of this hobbies array. So that should be science. And you can also get the properties inside the nested object literal. So we can get the streets address by first going inside this address object and then getting the street property, which is a type string. Yeah, so let's take a look at that. So we have John, and for the hobbies, we have science, and we also have the street name. Yeah. So you can also like add a property to an object like after you've initialized it. So if you want to give this person object another property, let's say email, then we can just set it using the dot notation like this. So if we were to log this person object again, let's see. Then as you can see, now we have, now this person object has an email of johndoe@gmail.com. Yeah, so you can give an object a new values like after initializing it using the a dot notation. And you can also like change the existing values by using the dot notation. So if we want to change this person's name, first name from John to Jane, and then console log this, then yeah, so now as you can see, this person has a first name of Jane instead of John. Yeah. Yeah, so I think this is a good place to stop. But yeah, so I think I have like more slides to cover, but so let's leave this to our next meeting. So that's going to be next Sunday. But I'll make sure to show you guys this meeting notes and also the recording. But I hope you guys got like the basics of JavaScript and that like, you know, what is JavaScript, which is a programming language that is like run on the browser. And you also learned like how to run JavaScript. So you basically need to have a index.html file, and then you can either like include a script with by specifying the path of the file, or just include a script and putting your JavaScript code directly inside this script tag. And then you can like go to your browser, open up your HTML document, and just go to your developers tool and go to the console tab. And then you should like see the console log of your JavaScript code. And you also learned about like some of the data types that you can have in JavaScript. And we have like string, number, boolean, and object, and we also have like null and undefined data types. And you also learned about like how to output strings with variables. So the recommended way is like the template string notation. So you can use a backtick instead of like single comma sign, and then you can like use a money sign and braces, curly braces to pass in any types of like logic or the variable, and then like it will automatically convert that, like convert the output of this statement into a string when it's like being executed. And you also learned about arrays, which are useful when you have like a list of elements, like list of stuff. And you also learn about this JavaScript object literal. So it is a really easy way to structure your data in a nicer way. Like we have over here a person, and person has like many properties like first name, last name, age, and address, and whatnot. And yeah, so we're gonna continue this slide during our next meeting, but I hope you guys have a good rest of the day. And yeah, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer them. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Yeah, bye-bye.